Varieties of Vipassana. That's my little talk today. So, start out just with the notion of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a quality that everybody possesses. It's just innate to being human. There's a definition I got for it off the internet. Purposely bringing one's attention to the present moment experience. And so the foundational sutta from the Buddha that talks about mindfulness is called the Satipatthana Sutta, or the four foundations of mindfulness. And the four foundations, or the four fields or pastures for mindfulness: mindfulness of the body sensations, where the body is in space, mindful of whether you're lying down, sitting in a chair, walking. Second foundation, feeling tone, which is an interesting one, mindfulness of feeling tone. The Pali word, the language of the Buddha, was Vedana. So being mindful of whether things are coming into your experience are positive, things you like, negative, things you dislike, or are they neutral? There's just a feeling tone that arises with every object that arises in your experience. It's not so much emotions or thoughts or dialogue, it's just a feeling tone that arises in your experience. That's a real interesting one to tune into, but that's mindfulness of the mind, which would be your thoughts, your emotions, whatever's going through the mind. Sometimes sounds are considered part of the mind, sometimes considered part of the body. And then mindfulness of dhammas, the phenomena of the world, is one way of thinking about the dhammas. It's also some of the lists the Buddha made, Noble Eightfold Path, things like that. So this mindfulness can be developed. And here's a quote from that Satipatthana Sutta. And what bhikkhus are the monks he's training, and what bhikkhus is the faculty of mindfulness. Here, bhikkhus, the noble discipline, is mindful, possessing supreme mindfulness and discretion. One who remembers and recollects what was done and said long ago. He dwells contemplating the body in the body, feelings in feelings, mind in mind, phenomena in phenomena, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure to the regard of the world. This is called the faculty of mindfulness. So that's another interesting, that's the Buddhist take on mindfulness. So a lot of these Buddhist teachings were brought to the United States really in the early 1970s. Some of this Theravada Buddhist, I'm speaking mostly of the Theravada Buddhists, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Other forms of Buddhism came through as well. But this idea of mindfulness and the use of mindfulness started entering the Americas in the 1970s. First at meditation centers, well, it wasn't really centers, but meditation retreats and things. These names probably ring a bell. Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, and some others. They began to bring the trainings they had received in Thailand and Burma back to the United States. And then my understanding of it is a lot of people involved in psychotherapy, therapists of different types began to practice meditation, practice mindfulness, and out of that, some of these therapies and things that we hear about developed. John Kabat-Zinn, I think in the 1970s, he was on a retreat and he had somewhat of an epiphany that he could help people who were in just pain and could not be helped through medical means at that time. So he developed MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. You're all kind of familiar with that, I'm sure. I've heard of it. We've taught it here a couple times. And that's proven to be a very successful program with mindfulness. There's a form of therapy out there, cognitive-based therapy. Maybe you're familiar with that. It's also becoming mindful of your thinking processes. Somatic therapy, it's helped with stress, anxiety, rumination, and present moment happiness, right? So I think all of us here who've been sitting a while, we know that it works, right? That it helps. So anyway, mindfulness is there. So let me just go through a little bit of I was a history teacher for 35 years, so I get to hear a little history. So the Buddha did his teaching, we think he around 470 before the Common Era, so roughly 2,500 years ago. And then after his death, a number of differing schools of Buddhism emerged. This was before it moved north into Tibet and into China, became Chan, and then to Japan it became Zen, but this is just still in India. A number of different schools emerged in India. And the one school that we know today, that's left that we know today, is the Theravada school. I think there were 12 others, or 11 or 12 others. And the story goes as to why the Theravada school survived. There was a king, Ashoka. Northern India was divided into little kingdoms. It wasn't a unified country. And he engaged his country, his army, with another army of another kingdom. I guess it was a tremendously bloody battle. And there were just, wounded and dead soldiers all over the ground. And he came out to the battlefield and was distraught at what he had done. Really, he had initiated the conflict. And then as he looked over the battlefield, distraught in this emotional state, he saw a Buddhist monk walking very peacefully by the side. And so at that point, he converted to Buddhism and then began to spread Buddhism across his area of India, mostly northern India. He put up, they call it Edicts of Ashoka, were these stone pillars that he put across his kingdom with some of the suttas and the teachings of the Buddha on there. And at one point, he sent his son to Sri Lanka, the island of Sri Lanka, or sometimes it used to be known as Ceylon, but it's off the coast of India on the east coast, and established a school of Theravada Buddhism there. At that point, next 600 to 1,000 years, Buddhism itself died out in India, the mother country, pretty much. There was a lot of invasions from the north. People from the steppe lands of Asia invaded, set up a big dynasty there, Mughal dynasty, but that's not that important. But it did survive in Sri Lanka. And so the Theravada school survived all of the onslaughts. Buddhism also moved north prior to that into Tibet. And Jampa, our teacher here, he studies in the Tibetan Buddhist system. And since the monks that went north the missionaries that went north had a knowledge of healthcare, that they were most welcomed in these villages and things in the north. And it spread across Central Asia, now where Mongolia is today, and all the way across to China, and then across to Japan. And that became Zen Buddhism in Japan, and that's Jokai's tradition, Soto Zen from Japan. And then it made its way to Korea, and that's Tim Colohan's tradition. So anyway, you can see that it's all going on. I am more, although I've studied Tibetan Buddhism, I did for about 5 years with a teacher, I'm more aligned with Theravada Buddhism, Western Theravada Buddhism. It's just kind of where my head is at. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. The rest of the talk is that brand of Buddhism that made its way from Sri Lanka, mostly to Burma. It made it to Cambodia, Burma, Thailand, and Laos, and some parts of Vietnam. In Vietnam, the Mahayana Buddhism from the north came into Vietnam from the north, and the Theravada Buddhism from the south came into Vietnam from the south. So they have a little bit of a mixture of the two. Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese monk, so he had exposure, mostly Zen, but he had exposure to both. So anyway, I find that very interesting. So over the centuries afterwards, Theravada Buddhism became more of a religion. This is kind of my opinion on this. And I'm sure meditation was practiced in the monasteries, but it was felt, maybe I'm overreaching a little bit, but especially in Burma and Thailand, it was felt that liberation wasn't possible in the age we were living in. So it became more of a devotional practice in many countries. It wasn't a practice of meditation so much. I'm a little unclear on that, so don't quote me on that. Yeah, it said it was felt we lived in a degenerate age, and that what was needed was another Buddha to appear. And then that person would once again begin bringing people to liberation. In the 1800s, Great Britain took over both Sri Lanka and Burma, and they were bringing in Christianity. Christian missionaries were coming in, and this somewhat alarmed the Theravadan Buddhists in Burma, especially, and they began to revive the monasteries, and a couple of the monks made the bold leap that says liberation was possible in the late 1800s. And one of the leading figures in this Burmese movement was a man named Mahasi Sayadaw. So a revival began. And in Theravadan Buddhism, the first level of awakening, they call it stream entry. He says stream entry is possible not only for monks, but it's possible for lay people. So they began to offer to anyone who wanted to come, Burmese lay people at first, anybody who wanted to come, and this is in the late 1800s, 3-month meditation retreats. And the style of meditation was somewhat radical. Instead of a meditation that focuses on concentration on one object and developing a highly concentrated mind, the term for it is the jhanas, these really high level, these concentrated states that are very refined and take years and years of practice and months of retreat for most people. He says, we don't, in order to become liberated, you don't need to do that. And so they sought a style of meditation, was moving meditation. So instead of concentrating on one object, you would move your attention to whatever object appeared in your experience. Hear a sound, sound. Body sensation, body sensation. Thought. Whatever came into your experience and was predominant, you would note it and actually label it. So thought, sound, use a mental label. And apparently in Burma, they began to have quite a bit of success with that style of practice and the deep, intensive meditation. And that style was taught to some of the luminaries of the Western Vipassana movement that I just spoke to. Jack Kornfield studied in Burma. I think Joseph Goldstein did. I know Sharon Salzberg has been there, and they studied that particular style of meditation and brought it back to America. So I began dabbling in meditation in the early 1980s, if you can believe that. And this is what I was taught. This is the type of meditation I was taught. was this moving from object to object to object to object meditation. And as a young man, I was in my late teens, early 20s, I think. And I had a lot to straighten out. A lot, And so for me, for many years, it wasn't so much a pathway to liberation. It was a pathway to just figure out what was going on up here. And it was an interesting process to do that because I wasn't doing psychotherapy on myself. I was just getting very aware of my thought patterns. And I had all these little labels for each different kind of thought pattern that would come up. Oh, that's thinking about the future, or thinking about the past, or I have all these little words that I would attach to these things. And what that did for me, and this went on for quite a few years, what it did for me was I just didn't listen to all that stuff anymore so much. Because it would come up, but then I didn't feed it any kind of energy, and then it would just die down and less and less. It was quite helpful for me. Anyway, it has helped keep me sane, present, for the last 40 years, really. Like I said, I taught high school for 35 years. I'm still sane. I'm still present. I don't shake. I'm okay. I think this practice helped a lot with that. So I have one, let me see if I can find it. There's an interesting book, it's called Living Dharma, or Living Buddhist Masters. Unfortunately, many of them have passed on, but this is mostly Theravadan teachers. So this is just a quick quote from Mahasi Sayadaw. If I get the microphone out of my way here. The aim of this practice and its greatest benefit is release from greed, hatred, and delusion, which are the roots of all evil and suffering. The intensive course and insight training can lead you to such release. So work ardently with this end in view so that your training will be successfully completed. This kind of training and contemplation based on the foundations of mindfulness, satipatthana, is that taken by all Buddhas and noble ones for attaining enlightenment. You are to be congratulated on having the opportunity to take this same kind of training. So this is just an excerpt from Mahasi Sayadaw. So that's one style of practice. Also coming out of Burma was a teacher named, let me see my notes here. Uba Kim or Uba Kin, and his student or disciple was S.N. Goenka. Has anybody been on a Goenka retreat? There you go. Yes, you probably know more about this than I have not actually sat a Goenka retreat. But rather than do that type of practice that I just described, Uba Kin and his student Goenka, they do the body scan, correct? A lot of body scanning. So their 10-day Goenka courses are offered actually in California. Is that the place out in the desert here in California? Joshua. Yeah, 29 Palms Joshua Tree area. And my understanding, there's 3 days of sort of concentration practice where you just do breath meditation. Hold it, yeah. Okay, so that's the first, to develop calm the mind into a state of concentration, and then focus on body. They call it sweeping your attention through your body, back and forth through the body for a week. That's what you do. They ask for you to do it very slowly. Yeah, I've done quite a bit of the sweeping meditation at times. In parts of my body I don't feel at all. For the people on Zoom, I'm talking about Goenka retreats, and there's a participant at the church here that has done one, so we were kind of discussing what that was like. But anyway, it's just that sweeping back and forth through the body, and my understanding is it begins to break down the solidity of the body and the conceptual framework we have of our body. And in that way, you can break free of sort of that conceptual frame that we are usually in. I think I have a quote from, here's a quote from Goenka. Anything that arises in the mind will manifest itself as a sensation on the body. If you observe this sensation, you are observing both mind as well as matter. So, kind of interesting way to practice. I bring it up because it's very popular in the United States. I think they offer the retreats for free. They ask for donations, of course, but it's a way of many people are practicing who are of humble financial means. And a lot of people that I know have gone on those retreats have gotten a lot out of it. So it's another way of practicing Vipassana. Pardon?
It's 10 days, and then once you finish your 10 days, you go back and do a 3-day. You can't start with 3 days.
Right, you have to start with, you have to start with a 10-day. I remember my first retreat. I didn't know what I was doing. It was out in a place called the Lama Foundation in New Mexico. And it was with a Burmese teacher named Munindra, who was a student of Mahasi Sayadaw. And it was hard. It was really hard, 10 days. It was very hard. But something hooked me on it. And then, 30 retreats later, I'm still doing them. So let's see where I'm at here. So there's a third style of practice I want to mention. It's somewhat of an open awareness practice. So we're going to move from Burma now to Thailand. And in Thailand, in the similar time frame, late 1800s into the early 1900s, and continues on till today, there was a group of monks who felt that Buddhism in Thailand had gotten too entwined with the government. I'm not doing this quite right, but it became too formal in its presentation, and there wasn't enough meditation. There wasn't enough actual practice for them, and so there was this attempt to recreate the lifestyle of the Buddha, which meant for them that they would go out into the jungles of Thailand, many of them as solitary practitioners. They would have one robe, they would have a mosquito net and an umbrella for the rain, and that was all the possessions that they had, and a begging bowl. And then they would spend their days and nights even in meditation, and then they go down to the village probably in the morning and get their one meal a day. And they began to do this intensive meditation. And many of them became quite liberated. And the stories of some of the monks, the autobiography of some of these monks that did this, if you want to read a wild tale of a Buddhist monk in the Thai forest, the autobiography of Ma Bua, B-M-A-H, and a new word, Bua, B-O-O-W-A. It's a really interesting story. There's all kinds of spirits and serpents and tigers and all kinds of stuff and practice. And once they had been out in the forest for a long period of time, some of them came back and began to teach meditation and set up meditation centers. And I think a second generation Thai forest monk was named Akhan Cha. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Okay, yeah. He was a teacher for Jack Kornfield and I think Joseph Goldstein as well. Jack Kornfield was at his monastery for many years in Thailand. And he taught a different style of meditation. It wasn't an intensive style like Mahasi Sayadaw, where you did the 16 hours a day of sitting and walking meditation and continually being present to your experience, or Uwa Kin and Goenka, where it's also that intense style of sitting on. Akhan Cha felt that formal meditation only was in service of allowing the meditator to stay present with all their activities 24 or in their waking life. And so if you went to his monastery, yes, there was meditation, yes, there was chanting, but it wasn't continually all day long. There wasn't this intensive style of retreats. And one of the stories that Jack Kornfield relates when he was there at Akhan Cha's monastery, he took a year off to go study in Burma with Mahasi Sayadaw. So he did that intense practice there. And he came back to Akhan Cha's monastery and said, I have all these wonderful things to tell you, all the great meditative experiences that I've had and all this. And then Akhan Cha just looked at him and said, oh, some more stuff to let go of then, isn't there? Because he'd become attached to these deep states of concentration and everything that he'd come across, and that wasn't what Akhan Cha was teaching at all. I think there's another story. Akhan Cha did sort of the similar thing with his teacher. I think it was Octan Moon, but I'm not sure. He went out in the forest for X amount of time, and he came back and told his teacher all the wonderful things that he had discovered, and then his teacher says, you missed the point. You just missed the point. All that stuff comes and goes like everything else, right? You might have a great state of concentration or, body turned into light or whatever, but then where is it now? It's not here. It's gone. And so there was this idea of staying very, very present to your experience and beginning to know the one that is aware. Who is the knower? What is the knower of all these experiences? And that for him and for the Thai forest tradition was the most important thing. Who is this knower? And there's a famous line, quote from Akhan Cha. Was anybody here for Victor's talk about a month or two ago, 6 weeks ago? Victor Bird was our former guiding teacher before Jokai. And so his whole talk was based somewhat upon this quote. So try to be mindful and let things take their course. Then your mind will become still in any surroundings, like a still forest pool. All kinds of wonderful animals will come to drink at the pool, and you will clearly see the nature of all things. You will see many strange and wonderful things come and go, but you will be still. This is the happiness of the awakened one. So it's the idea of becoming the knower of whatever occurs in your experience, but not getting drawn into it. It's not so much sort of being removed from it. But it arises in your experience and leaves, but you don't necessarily have to get involved with it. So it's a meditation on becoming more and more present to your experience over and over again. There's a story about Akhan Cha, some of the training I'm doing up at Spirit Rock. in Thailand, there's like fortune tellers, shaman, fortune tellers, magic folk. And this gentleman was a palm reader, one of the skills he had. And he heard how wise Akhan Chah was. And so he went to see him, hear him talk. And he was very much moved by what he heard and the presence that Akhan Chah had. And he asked him, politely if he could read his palm, not poem. And so I guess reluctantly, Akhan Chah put his palm out, and the guy looked at it, and he came up in shock and said, "Your anger line is very, very long." And and Akhan Chah says, "Yes, I'm a very angry person." But he says, "I choose not to. I don't relate to my personality like that. I'm the knower, right? I relate to the knowing aspect. I'm knowing my anger, and that gives me the freedom not to have to be angry, right? I can be removed from it." So I found that kind of a nice little story, So now I'm going to get a little bit esoteric with you, just as a kind of the final thing to say. So there's a little bit of a debate in Theravadan Buddhism. The Burmese practitioners do not feel that there is an awareness or consciousness that's in the background, that consciousness only arrives with the experience. So there's sound consciousness, and then there's vision, and then there's body sensation consciousness. But there's no field of awareness or consciousness that exists. The consciousness arises with each object in your experience. The Thai Buddhism, this Thai forest tradition, feels that there is awareness, that you can, and that the objects arise within that awareness and are observed or within that field of awareness. I don't know if it makes a big difference in the day-to-day life, whether which one of these is the way to go, but it's interesting to contemplate. So they're having us up north at Spirit Rock sort of contemplate that and sort of feel which way we go on that question. A debate's been going on apparently for 1,700 years over this. So it's kind of interesting to think about. So hopefully that was helpful. I don't know if it was or not, but I find it very interesting, all these different styles of practice. I'm sure there are many, many more, and maybe you practice them as well. And no one would argue that metta practice is not important or wonderful. So I put that out there. So I'm going to end on somewhat of a lighter note, I hope. So I lead the Wednesday night sits, and it's all Zoom. So I often lead a guided meditation, and then we talk a little bit. Travis has been there many times. And I also sometimes pull up poems or readings or something. So this is kind of a fun one. You might like it. You are 8 years old. It is Sunday evening. You have been granted an extra hour before bed. The family is playing Monopoly. You have been told you are big enough to join them. You lose. You are losing continuously. Your stomach cramps with fear. The money pile in front of you is almost gone. Your brothers are snatching all of the houses from your streets. The last street is being sold. You have to give in. You have lost. And suddenly you know that it's only a game. You jump up with joy. You accidentally knock the lamp over. It falls on the floor and drags the teapot with it. The others are angry, but you laugh when you go upstairs. You know, for you have seen the joy of being nothing and having nothing, and knowing that gives you an immeasurable freedom. I like that little story. So, anyway, thank you for listening. Appreciate it.